you. Well, thanks, Willem, for that introduction. And let me make a couple introductions of my own. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here today. Thank you very much for coming. And I'm also delighted to be joined by my guests, Eddie Hartman, the co-founder of LegalZoom and now a partner at Simon-Kucher, as well as Madhavan Ramanujam, a senior partner at Simon-Kucher, to talk about the ways to remove the guesswork and unlock reliable growth, especially in what's a pretty fast-changing and probably unreliable market right now.
Yeah.
So, welcome.
Thank
you. And Madhavan, I'm going to start with you. So, I want to talk about what makes life difficult at the moment for companies, right? Super big picture here. Can you start by outlining the kinds of macro, real-world challenges clients and non-clients are facing in the current business environment?
Thank you, absolutely. And by the way, you pronounce my name better than I do, so that was
brilliant. Get the job.
No, if you take companies right now, there's some significant challenges that most of the companies that we talk to face. Right? I mean, if you look at the overall macroeconomic environment, etc., I think majority of the companies have taken some kind of cost actions. Either that's reduction in force, or like adjusting their supply chains, things of that nature, where they have already taken a lot of the cost measures. But then next what, right? That's where unlocking growth really fits in. How do they actually think about achieving profitable growth through better acquisition, monetization, and retention strategies? And this is literally what we actually see as like the #1 topic for many CEOs when we talk to, because how to get back to that profitable growth, not just cut costs, but how do you actually increase the top line?
Yeah.
That keeps people up at night.
Just a quick follow-up. Have you seen that change over time? Do you think that there's more cutting to achieve growth right now than there has been in the past?
I think probably at least many of the companies that we talk to have already cut pretty deep.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can cut. I don't know if a famous CEO who actually cut his way to glory in terms of just costs. You have to actually focus on the top line and growth.
Yeah.
And that's really where the big challenge is. How do you actually do that? How do you put fair value for the products that you actually bring to market? What price should you charge? How do you get it out and unlock growth that is profitable and sustainable and better for everyone?
Okay, so no cutting your way to growth. Eddie, let me follow up. What do clients tell you makes it difficult for their organizations to achieve that growth and confront those challenges? Is it inside the organization? Is it macro? What are the big drivers there?
Well, Philip, they're seeing exactly what Madhavan's calling out here. It's a maddeningly uncertain environment. This recession that we're hearing about, where is it? When is it coming? And it, by the way, very well may come. I have no idea. Inflation is going down, but now it's sticky.
Yeah.
Is it going to continue going down? Who knows? In an environment like this, what do we want? We want a bit of certainty around top line, around bottom line. What are our levers? I think a lot of us would love to do what Madhavan's saying. We'd love to keep doing the things that we know are certain, like cutting costs, but eventually you cut muscle. You cut muscle, you're cutting into your future. Where does your growth come from next? So I think it's an incredibly challenging environment. When I was an entrepreneur, the thing that kept me up at night was not how do I control production, how do I work with my C team, how do I work with my investors was sometimes a struggle, but it was how do I make sure that I hit the numbers that I promised them.
Right.
That was the thing that was scary. So a genuine framework for ensuring that I'm actually going to hit my revenue target is more and more in demand. And I'll tell you one thing that we're seeing, and I'll just give you some numbers. Now this is predominantly software. Software is my specialty. But in software, we see that right now on median, if you're looking for $1 of ARR, so you promised your investor, I'm going to give you $1 of ARR at the end of the year, and it has to come from somewhere. If I choose to farm that dollar, it's going to cost me about 68 cents.
Right.
If I choose instead, and when I say farm, I mean I'm going to look at my existing customer base, right? And I'm going to make it on the backs of people that I currently have as customers. If on the other hand, I say, no, I'm going to get new revenue, I'm going to acquire, it's going to cost me $1.78, 3 times, to make that same dollar of revenue. Now, you can't just farm. You must hunt. If you don't hunt, you have no one to farm, right? Okay, so we have to do both these things. But that $1.78, it's not only more expensive, it's also less certain in terms of payback. If I only have $1 of ARR, paying back that $1.78 of investment takes longer. And what did we just all agree the environment is? It is maddeningly uncertain.
Yeah.
So will I get that $1.78 back? I don't know. And by the way, it's a trend. I think a lot of us remember when to get $1 of ARR, it only cost maybe $1 to hunt that. This trend has been going up faster than inflation, and honestly, I don't think it's coming down anytime soon. So the big fundamental question, you said structural, technologic, what's the thing? I think it's dealing with these macroeconomic issues, finding new levers like better farming, but unfortunately they're not simple. They are transformational. They are evolutionary, not evolutionary, but revolutionary. It's teaching your team a new language.
I suppose it's unfair for me to ask you, when do you get that 178 back, right? When do you get payback on that? But was there a time when that was more possible to predict than there is now? Has it ever been more possible to predict?
Well, I mean, I think most people would agree that it has never been harder to predict than right now. I think certainly hindsight's 2020, but you would say almost at any point leading up to now, first of all, it was a less investment. 2016, it was only $1.20. $1.78 now, right? So much shorter payback period, but also a far more certain business environment, right? So when we're thinking, what are the levers available to us, like Madhavan said, well, if we cut costs, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if we're going for growth, where do we find it? The most certain place is with our existing customer base. So how do we price for that? Well, it requires new muscles for most people.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you this, and this is a slightly unfair question maybe. What if you brought up the R word? When do you think there'll be a recession, and when do you think it will happen?
The Wall Street Journal, ladies and gentlemen, asking me, Eddie Hartman, if I think there's going to be a recession. Yes, and for $100, I'll tell you exactly when.
I'll pay you later. Madhavan, let me come back to you. So when you're working with your clients to try and get them to this point where they're thinking about farming and hunting and they're thinking about where to get that additional revenue, what do you offer as a business in terms of models or ways of thinking about the concepts like value and growth?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, like if you think about the customer base that Eddie was talking about, right? I mean, if you have to unlock growth, you have to acquire customers, you need to monetize, and you also need to retain them. And when you actually do all three of them, you basically have customer lifetime value from your customers, and you maximize that, right? It's as simple as that. But the challenge is, most companies, when they think about acquisition, monetization, or retention, they often think about this a bit in silos. Like either they think about acquisition at all costs, or they think about monetizing, but they're not thinking about acquisition, or they're simply thinking about retention, right? I mean, and there are inherent trade-offs in acquisition, monetization, and retention, and understanding these trade-offs is really the key to unlocking growth. For instance, if I say acquisition versus monetization, if I simply say if I price less, I would acquire more. If I price more, I would probably monetize more. Right? If you think about acquisition versus retention, if I say that my pricing model or my business model is something like a pay-as-you-go, I might acquire more because people are just paying when they actually use the product. But if I want to retain someone, I might have to think about a subscription kind of business model, right? So if I monetize and retention, if I let's say increase prices, I'm going to monetize. But if I increase prices, I'm not going to retain my customers. So there are inherent trade-offs across acquisition, monetization, and retention. So the models that we actually bring to the table basically talk about how to break through from these trade-offs and build towards unlocking growth. So our models are based on some of those, and then really aligning price to value. And when we think about price, we have to also discuss what price really means. When most people think about price, they think of a dollar figure. That's just a price point. Like price is a measure. Like liter is a measure of volume. Price is a measure of value. And when you actually think of it this way, price literally stands for how do people need your product and how badly do they actually need it. So the price and value are basically different sides of the same coin. The Latin actually figured this out long back. There's only one word for price and value. It's called pretium. It stands for both price and value.
Right.
So our frameworks actually take from those kind of principles where we actually bring to bear how to extract like fair value for the products that you actually bring to the market and achieve profitable growth and unlock better growth.
And how revolutionary are those conversations sometimes with clients? I'm not asking you to name names, but how much give and take is there with the clients, and how ready are they to accept the new pricing models that you might suggest they use?
So I think it's, of course, I would like to say it's super revolutionary. No, but jokes apart, there is definitely an appetite to actually really think about this, because if you actually think about pricing or just these kind of business models, most CEOs probably had one chapter in business school where they talked about this. It's not like there was a fully dedicated course on how to monetize, how to actually make money. But that's actually the most important thing if you actually think about it, right? I mean, we probably learned a lot about finance, supply chain, operations, analytics, but all good. But at the end of the day, you actually have to make money. So for most CEOs that we actually meet, pricing is more of an art. But what we actually bring to the table is the science. And once they realize that there's a science and an art to the mix, they're really ready to actually embrace this, because the proven methodologies that we bring to the table really get to the heart of understanding what customers need, what do they value, and what are they willing to pay for. And then building the products around this kind of information.
That's fascinating. And just a sort of quick follow-up on that. Can you model it by sector almost, or is it by business type? How does that modeling work? Can you give us a kind of broad overview?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there are some nuances by sectors, of course, based on different sectors, there might be some market conditions, regulatory conditions, things like this that we have to actually take into bear. But overall, the basic models of understanding, customer needs, value, and willingness to pay, sort of scale across sectors that we actually work in, but then we take the constraints of whichever sector that we are operating in to actually ground the answers to more reality. Eddie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, just that I think that there are real differences sector by sector, but I'll tell you a funny, I used to say that these fundamental principles, acquisition, monetization, and retention, applied to all sectors.
Right.
And then as a joke, I would say, except I guess coffins. It's a bad joke. And then one of our colleagues said to me, actually, no, coffins are sold to retain. And I said, how is that possible? How can coffins be sold to retain? And they said, funeral homes often do the first funeral in an attempt to get the entire estate. So they'll do the first funeral in an attempt to build a relationship with the family. So apparently, even in the funeral business, you're thinking about acquiring and then monetizing and then retaining. It's not at all a single-shot thing, even in death.
Well, there's only two certainties, death and taxes. So there you go. There's some certainty in the market, right? Eddie, let me ask you about some of the models that Madhavan has just talked about, and that sort of scientific approach, essentially, to pricing. How can that help businesses reframe how they approach some of the challenges that we talked about earlier, and get themselves in a resilient mode for what is likely to be ongoing uncertainty and a possible recession?
Yeah, I think first surrender to the challenges. If you need to think about acquisition, monetization, and retention, even in the coffin industry, then you have to think of it no matter where you are. But I do think that we are increasingly able to locate ourselves within these trade-offs. So as Madhavan said, there's a struggle between acquisition and monetization. My investors used to say to me at LegalZoom, can't you increase the conversion rate on the website? Can't you get more people to buy? And I would say, sure, let's drop the prices to $1. I'll get tons of people to buy. They said, okay, that's not what we meant. And I knew that wasn't what they meant, because there's a trade-off. We always need to think about these trade-offs, right? But think about the possibilities that we have now to play with them, right? There's a competitor to Tesla that's come in from South Korea. Now, Tesla's a very tough animal to try to compete with, but they of course have a high-priced car. This new company comes in and they sell you the car but not the battery they lease you. So they're able to come in with a different price model in order to give you a lower entry point and then spread the payments over a longer period of time. What have they played with there? The acquisition monetization trade-off, right? I'll tell you another brilliant thing. Who's read about this? What is Mercedes doing right now? They say, we'll sell you a car with a certain number of horsepower, but it has more horsepower. It has many more horsepower. If you want those horsepower that are sitting in your garage under the hood of your Mercedes, make a phone call, and we'll unlock them. Fail to pay us, and we'll relock them. Think about that. What is that playing with? It's playing with your inherent bias, right? Once it's your Mercedes, not a Mercedes, you're much more likely to do that. Now, that wasn't a tool that was available to people even, I think, 5 years ago. But it's available now. So we can't escape the fundamental model that Madhavan has talked about. There's no way out. You do have to acquire, you do have to monetize, you do have to retain. And by the way, think about it, right? The tension between acquisition and monetization, what is that? That's sales. The tension between monetization and retention, what is that? That's net dollar retention for people who think about this stuff, right? So these are incredibly important things. There's no escaping them. But we have so many more ways to attack this model now and to find ways to turn it to our advantage.
That's fascinating. And I imagine not able to be done in an era which wasn't so technologically advanced, right? So let's talk about the sort of role of technology in changing this scenario. Madhavan, when we think about technology in this picture, what role does it play in setting these businesses up for future growth, and how does it play into the pricing picture as well as you think about it?
So I think Eddie already articulated, one of the key modes where technology is playing a role, where you can actually, control how you're actually monetizing, measuring some of these things. I think the Mercedes example is a great one. Couldn't have been possible before, but what you're really doing is now invented new, business models because of technology. But the other thing that I also see where technology plays a key part is understanding how to actually do more test and learn. Right, this is really important because most companies actually would love to build their products, iterate, and then learn from what customers want. But technology has really powered that by doing things like A/B testing. So you can actually test different populations, like where one actually sees one version of the product, one that actually doesn't. Things like this was actually not possible 10, 20 years ago. So I think that's been a real push in not only enabling business models, but testing and learning your way into the right business models.
If I could just add on to that, and I think you'd agree with this, it's amazing how many people wait until the product is finished to do that sort of testing, by which point it's kind of too late, isn't it? Like, you put the thing out there and then you decide to test the features and the price tag. Wouldn't it have been better to, when it's more in ideation phase, to say, we like to say this, I know you like this muffin, but do you like this muffin at $5? Do you like this muffin at $8? That might stop you from building a bakery that no one's actually going to keep profitable, right? Might save you a lot of pain.
And you've both talked about retention and the value of existing client bases. Can you tell me how you think about lifetime customer value when we're thinking about the pricing model? Madhavan, maybe you could pick up on that.
Yeah, so the way we actually think about, if you think about acquisition, monetization, retention as like the three forces that actually govern unlocking growth, you get a customer in the door, you monetize by selling products and services, and then you also retain them, as in they're still within the ecosystem of your products and services and not necessarily going to any competition. But over a period of time, you can probably also sell more goods and services to the same person. So when you think about customer lifetime value, that basically stands for, if I take a snapshot today, what is the value that I can actually, partake with this customer over the lifetime of that customer, right? So often, one of the strategies that, we sort of also, push with our customers is called land and expand. So you at least try to land a product and then expand over a period of time by upselling them or cross-selling them new products that you actually bring to the table, rather than putting everything on the first attempt, and then that just becomes a bit of like a more like a feature shock. So that landing and expanding motion is also tied with the whole customer lifetime value. So thinking about the full value that you can actually get over the lifetime. Eddie, you're smiling. So
I'm smiling because so Madhavan and I work together very closely, and this man is, he's a genius. But here's one thing that Madhavan told me. Think about the normal attempt to do a land and expand. Many of you have seen this, right? There's an entry-level product, and then there's a silver product and a gold product, and then, of course, there's the call me for a quote product. Do you know that on average, 80% of the value is in the entry-level product, and this has been studied, okay? So 80% of the value is in the entry-level product, okay. How expensive is the gold product relative to the entry-level product? It's usually 2 to 3 times as expensive. Now put yourself in the shoes of the poor salesperson. You have 20% more value, because I told you 80% of the value is already there in the entry-level product. And you want to ask for 2 to 3 times the price, but you only have 20% of the value to get you there. How do you make that work? And this is what happens with businesses that think that they're going to land and expand. They really need to be a bit ruthless about pulling back on that entry-level product, but they also need to be smart about it. Otherwise, the entry-level product won't really reflect the brand. If they cheapen it too much, it doesn't represent your company. If they put too much into it, on the other hand, there's no way to monetize that customer later. There's no way to really expand. So you probably have a lot more to comment about this.
Absolutely. 90% of companies talking about landing and expanding are only landing. They're not expanding.
There you go.
To unlock growth, you need to be able to also sell your next level of innovations to the same customer to actually unlock customer lifetime value.
If I could, sorry, if I could, you're the interviewer, I don't mean to cut you off. If I could riff on that for one more thing. My very favorite, I'm sure yours as well, we'll talk to customers and they'll say, our retention is amazing. It's 100%. Ladies and gentlemen, if your retention is 100%, you have the other problem. You are not charging enough. No one is even thinking about canceling with you because you are not even asking for your full value in the marketplace. And by the way, this is something entrepreneurs do to themselves day in and day out. When you see yourself as an entrepreneur, and I know from personal experience, when you see yourself running a business, when you see yourself answering to investors and the people who work for you, the thing that's terrifying is the idea that things might fail. How can you be sure they won't fail? Charge a price so low that no one can possibly say, I don't want that. And so you do, and they stay, and you don't raise prices, and inflation happens. Your retention is fantastic. Meanwhile, you go out of business because inflation eats you alive and you never raise prices on anyone. Anyway, that's end of sermon. Sorry, back to you, Philip.
Yeah, it's fine. I know Eddie and Madhavan are keen to take questions, so there will be mics in the room. I want to stay with you, though, on that 80-20 point first. The companies that hear you and act swiftly on that not giving 80% of the value away, can you characterize what kind of companies those are? What kind of clients are kind of most open to that scenario?
The ones that work with us. No, but yeah, I mean, sorry, you were going to say.
Oh, no, I can't improve on that comment. No, it's chronic. It's very widespread. Actually, I will give you an answer. Yeah. The ones that love their customers to death, exactly. The ones that really love their customers, and I almost want to call some people out, but I probably shouldn't. But here's the problem. You love your customers so much that you pack all these features into the entry-level package because you want them to see all this cool stuff. Exactly. And unfortunately, then how, I'm going to do it, how Evernote, will you ever get me to upgrade if the free product is fantastic? You made a fantastic product, but why will I upgrade? You gave me everything for free. That's a problem. You're not valuing yourself enough in the market. So oftentimes we find it's the people who care about the customer so much that is going to be a lodestone around their neck that drags them right out of business. And leaving, by the way, the people who don't care as much about the customers thriving and in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And I think that also translates in, what kind of price you actually set. Because if you don't have the, as an entrepreneur or company, to set the right price or have the courage to ask for the right price, you probably want to do right by your customer and kind of under monetize, which we actually call minivation in the book Monetizing Innovation. So I think the core characteristics of companies that don't do this well is either they are they love their customers, or the other thing is they are rushing to bring things to the market. I mean when we talk about that 80-20, 80% of value is actually in 20% of what people actually build. But the funny thing is this 20% is the easiest thing to build. So what most people would do is build the 20%, which is 80% of the willingness to pay, throw it out in the market, call it an MVP, which is minimum viable product, and then basically build 80% stuff which only governs 20% of willingness to pay, right? So they're basically thrown the farm away at that point. So the idea would be to say, that 20% that you actually, the 20% effort that gave you 80% of the product, make sure that you're actually monetizing it, because there's fair value that you exchange. Otherwise, you end up training your customers to expect more for free, right? So I think we should probably start calling MVP as the most valuable product, not the minimum viable product.
There you go. You just called it at the Future of Everything Festival. Thank you for that. You broke news. Any questions in the audience, please?
I just have a quick one. You mentioned what's kind of the appropriate attrition level if you're pricing right of clients that you should lose every year?
So top quartile GDR right now, that's gross dollar retention. So top quartile SaaS is 95%. If you have 95% gross dollar retention, which is pretty well correlated, and that's not exactly logo retention, but it's close. You're in the top quartile of all SaaS by performance. You'll probably have a incredibly high enterprise value to revenue multiple, because you'll be rewarded for that very, very high level. Down below 93, 92% is probably a warning sign. If you fall below 92% GDR, you're likely, you're below median at that point, and you probably do have a logo attrition issue. And of course, by the way, it'll also differ by cohort year. The first year will see more attrition than later years. I'm talking about a SaaS company that's a going concern, that's been going for a few years.
One in the back.
So pricing is critical, for sure, when you are going to market. So one of the questions, though, that I have is, there's a two-part question. First is, isn't there a psychological effect that if you're paying more for the product, that you're actually going to make sure that you're getting value out of that? And the second piece is, when you talk about land and expand, doesn't it also come back to customer success and customer value to make sure that they're getting the adoption that you need, that now you've got a successful customer in adoption that you could then go and farm later?
Okay, I take the first one, you take the second one.
Sure.
Okay. Or you take the, we can do it the other way around.
No, you take the,
okay,
go
ahead. Let's take the first one. So I think when you talk about like price and value, it's really about charging the right price for the value that you bring to the table, right? I mean, if you price it really high, there is a perception that that product actually has value, right? But you have to be careful that you don't, cross some kind of psychological thresholds where someone would laugh you out of the room. So it has to be within still acceptable boundaries of what that pricing is. Like, for instance, if I tell you like a cell phone for $100,000, you'll be like, no way, I wouldn't do it. Yeah, it's priced high. Is it of value? Maybe, but would you actually buy it? No. But a $1,000 iPhone started breaching that kind of boundary where it was within that psychological threshold for, let's say, consumer electronic devices, but you price it high to actually signal, value. I'll tell you some interesting fact. Like if you actually go to like a Safeway or like a, your favorite, grocery store, let's say you see 3 bottles of wine, $2, $5, and $50. Most people would actually say the $50 wine must be better because I'm actually paying more for it, right? But here's the fun part. There were actually, a lot of people who put this to a blind test and also an MRI test. So basically a $2, let's say, $50, $100 wine, and then you're given the $2 wine, but they will tell you that it's a $100 wine. And in a blind test, everyone says, oh, that wine was really better because it's $100, to your point. But when they actually did the MRI scans, they actually saw that the dopamine effect was also a lot more when they actually thought it was 100. So not only do we actually, think it is value, we also perceive it. So yes, to your question, but you have to be careful so that you don't exceed psychological thresholds. And in the book, Monetizing Innovation, we talk about how to actually think about pricing so that you're within these psychological thresholds.
I just want to add one more thing to that delicious comment. So the actual study, okay, we all know a placebo, right? It's a sugar pill presented as if it's medicine. Turns out, if you present a placebo for $5 and you present a placebo for $10, the $10 one is actually more effective at curing your cold.
No, that's the thing. Yeah.
Can you believe that? And so I said, well, clearly Madhavan...
Both were vitamin C.
Right, we need to go into business and sell an extra strength placebo, right? $25. But it's true. Like if you, terrible... by the way, I'm sorry to tell you, you've been caught. You committed that terrible crime. I don't know what it was. You ripped the tag right off the mattress, right? And now the police are after you. You need a lawyer. Great news, though, your rich uncle, you also didn't know about him. He's going to fund your total legal defense. Do you want the lawyer that's $1,500 an hour or the lawyer that's $500 an hour? $1,500 an hour, right? Of course you do. You don't know anything else. Hard to assess some things. Sometimes the price tells the story. But that was the first part of the question. I don't get to answer that one. I'll do the second part. So, usage. Fundamentally, when we see people churn, when we see people attrit, by the way, I love, if people are in the room are entrepreneurs, write this down and take this home, because this is actually useful stuff, okay? This is free. In general, there are 3 categories of pushback that you'll get. The first is fairness. That wasn't fair, right? You're asking me to pay more money. That's not fair. I'm not, I don't think the way that you want to charge me is fair. You've got a bank box, and you say that if I put in a watch, it's one price, but if I put in a more expensive watch, it's a different price. That's not fair, okay? So fairness, first objection, generally lines up with customers that are smaller. If you've got individual consumers or small businesses, fairness is big. The thing that you talked about is fit to value, right? Am I paying for what I'm getting? I'm not using everything. Why are you charging me this price? I only eat half the box of chicken nuggets. I should only pay for 6. They really care about only paying for what they get. We're getting exactly what they paid for. Super important. Generally lines up with your middle businesses. Then the third category, predictability. I didn't budget for that. I'm going to have to go back to my board and explain that this is a variance to budget. This lines up with the biggest, with the enterprise. By the way, interestingly, if you go to enterprise with an argument about fairness, they will laugh you out of the room. They don't care about it being fair at all. And by the way, they also typically don't care about fit to value either. They don't really care if they didn't use everything, right? Similarly, the small mom and pop or the consumer, they don't really care about predictability as much as they care about that sense of fairness. The middle group, though, that's what you're talking about. Make sure that they actually use it. I want to tell you, I think that's important no matter what group they're in, and here's why. If they don't really use your product, if they don't really use your offering, if they don't really use whatever it is that you think has value, you can't show them more value. And ladies and gentlemen, Madhavan said, what's important? Not just acquiring, not just monetizing, not just retaining, but all three. If they don't really experience what you have, how will you make that flywheel work? So maybe this is in conclusion, because I know we're at time, but what a fantastic question to end on. Yes, even if it is not the primary driver for your customer base, ensure that usage is always there, because in usage there is value, and pricing is nothing but the measure of value.
Super stuff, guys. Well, the smartest guys at the festival, I think. Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions and for joining us today. Eddie, and it's just been amazing. Thank you so much for all your explanation, breaking news, fact sharing. And these guys, I'm sure if you have more questions, I will bring them out afterwards if you want to stay in the room. But for now, I think we're taking a break in programming. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.